She screamed loudly, "Help me, auntie, help me, I am in pains, it is too painful, auntie," as the nanny shoved her in his direction while she continued to wail. He then violently twisted her back and shoved his long thing inside of her. "Please stop, uncle, stop, stop, you're hurting me." However, the nanny put her hands over her mouth. How it all began. In the heart of Lagos, there was a busy street filled with cars, motorcycles, and people going up and down. On that street stood an old building where many families lived together. It was called a "face me I face you" compound because all the rooms faced each other, like friends looking at one another. In one of those small rooms lived Mr. and Mrs. Okafor. They were a happy couple, even though life had not been easy for them. For many years, they prayed and hoped for a child. Every night, Mrs. Okafor would sit on her bed and whisper, "God, please bless us with a baby." One sunny morning, something special happened. Mrs. Okafor woke up feeling different. She went to the hospital and came back with the news. "Darling, we are going to have a baby," she told her husband with the biggest smile on her face. Mr. Okafor jumped up and danced around the room. "Praise God," he shouted, so loudly that the neighbors came out to see what was going on. Months passed, and the day finally came. Mrs. Okafor gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. They named her Ada, which means first daughter in their language. Little Ada brought so much joy to her parents and everyone in the compound. At night, the compound was always lively. Children played outside, aunties cooked in the shared kitchen, and neighbors gossiped in the hallways. Among them was Uncle Sam, a single, handsome young man who lived in one of the rooms. Uncle Sam loved children, and every evening, he would gather them under the big mango tree in the compound. "Come, come, children. Let's talk about God," he would say with his deep, friendly voice. The children loved Uncle Sam. He told stories from the Bible in such a fun way that they always wanted more. He would ask questions like, "Who knows the story of David and Goliath?" or, "What do you think it means to be kind?" Even though Ada was still a baby, Mrs. Okafor often stood by the window, rocking Ada in her arms, listening to Uncle Sam. Someday, Ada will join them, she thought with a smile. One day, Uncle Sam noticed Mr. Okafor sitting alone on the steps. He walked over and said, "Mr. Okafor, you must be so happy to have Ada in your life." Mr. Okafor nodded. "I am, but raising a child is not easy, especially in a place like this." Uncle Sam smiled and said, "Don't worry. God has a plan for little Ada. She is a blessing, and blessings always find their way." As the days turned into weeks, the compound felt like one big family. Everyone loved Ada, and her tiny giggles filled the air like sweet music. Uncle Sam continued teaching the children about God, and the Okafors were grateful to have him as a neighbor. 3 years later, Ada had grown into a beautiful, bright little girl. She had big, sparkling eyes, and her smile was so warm that everyone in the compound couldn't help but smile back when they saw her. Ada was always polite and obedient, and she loved helping her mother with little chores around the house. Her parents were so proud of her. Ada's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Okafor, worked hard every day to provide for their family. Sometimes, they had to travel for work and would stay away for weeks at a time. When they did, Ada stayed home with her nanny, who was Mr. Okafor's cousin. Her nanny was kind and always made sure Ada was fed and happy, but there was something about her that Ada couldn't quite understand. Uncle Sam, the handsome man who loved teaching the children about God, also visited the Okafor's home sometimes. He had a secret: he and the nanny were secretly dating. They would often whisper to each other when Theon afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Okafor had to leave for a long trip. Ada kissed them goodbye, and they promised to return soon. "Take care of Ada for us," Mr. Okafor said to the nanny as he handed her some money for food and other things. "Don't worry, Uncle and Auntie. I'll take care of her," the nanny said, smiling sweetly. As soon as they left, the nanny took Ada inside and won't come out till when she needs to buy something. No one suspected anything. On days when Uncle Sam was free, he would come over to the Okafor's house to visit. Ada loved it when he told Bible stories, but there was always a strange feeling in the air. Her nanny and Uncle Sam would whisper and laugh quietly when Ada played outside. Sometimes they would look at her with secret smiles. One day, Ada wandered into the living room and saw Uncle Sam and her nanny sitting too close on the couch. She had never seen them like that before. They were talking softly, but when they saw her, they quickly pulled apart and smiled nervously. "Hello, Ada," Uncle Sam said, trying to sound cheerful. "Come, let me tell you a story about David and Goliath." Ada, still confused, smiled and ran over to sit on his lap. "Tell me the story, Uncle Sam," she said eagerly. It was on the day that Ada sat on Uncle Sam's lap that something started to change. Ada was still a curious, innocent girl, but she didn't realize that something wasn't quite right with Uncle Sam's behavior. As he told her the Bible story, he felt uncomfortable emotions he couldn't explain. He didn't want Ada to get up, and for a moment, he just wanted to hold her close. But as soon as Ada stood up to run off and play, Uncle Sam realized that what he had just felt was wrong. He quickly stood up, feeling confused and ashamed. He left the house, walking quickly as he tried to shake off the strange thoughts that had crossed his mind. As he walked down the street, Uncle Sam felt guilty for the way he had acted. He knew he had made a mistake. His feelings didn't match the love and respect he should have for Ada, who was just a young girl. He thought about the stories he had shared with the children and the lessons of kindness and love. What had he done? "God, please forgive me," Uncle Sam whispered as he sat down on a nearby bench. He remembered how much he loved teaching the children about God's love and how he had always wanted to be a good example. But this wasn't right. Back at the house, Ada continued to play with her toys, unaware of the uncomfortable situation that had just happened. Her nanny came into the room and noticed the serious look on Uncle Sam's face when he returned. She didn't know what had happened, but she could tell something was off. The next time he gathered the children for a lesson about God, he focused on the story of Jonah. However, as soon as he spotted Ada among them, that familiar feeling surged back, this time even more intense than before. Ada sat among her peers, listening intently. Although she didn't grasp every detail, a warm wave of happiness washed over her, prompting her to smile at Uncle Sam. Each smile seemed to amplify the emotions swirling within him, making it increasingly hard for him to stay focused on the tale he was sharing. Eventually, he decided to wrap up the lesson early and sent the children home. For 2 days, he didn't visit the nanny, prompting her to check on him. When she arrived, he was deep in thought, but her knock pulled him back to the present. After chatting for about 30 minutes, she leaned in and began kissing him, but he felt no spark. As she continued, she noticed his lack of response and paused to ask, "What's wrong?" "I can't tell you," Uncle Sam replied. "Why not?" she pressed. "Is it about Ada?" His startled expression suggested she had struck a nerve. "How did you know?" he gasped. "I noticed how you reacted the last time you held her," she explained. "I've tried to fight it, but I can't," he admitted. "Don't worry, we can have a threesome," the nanny suggested. "I'll let you experience what I've been enjoying. Do you think I spend so much time indoors with her for no reason? I ask her to touch me and do things to me like licking and sucking," she said, glancing down at her own body. Uncle Sam was dumbfounded. Here he was thinking he was the worst human on earth for conceiving such thoughts. He didn't know that someone was already doing the unspeakable. The nanny went outside. After surveying the compound, she went inside and found Ada sleeping. She woke her up and carried her to Uncle Sam's room. When she opened the door, immediately Uncle Sam saw Ada. His whole body was charged once more, and he quickly undressed. Ada stood there looking confused, but she saw something very long and stiff. Uncle Sam asked her to touch it. She started crying. She saw some milky-looking liquid dropping from the tip. She screamed loudly, "Help me, Auntie, help me, I am in pains, it is too painful, Auntie," as the nanny shoved her in his direction while she continued to wail. He then violently twisted her back and shoved his long thing inside of her. "Please stop, Uncle, you're hurting me." However, the nanny put her hands over her mouth. 3-year-old Ada lost consciousness after the first penetration. When the nanny realized she was unresponsive, she quickly pushed Uncle Sam aside and began calling out, "Ada, wake up. Please wake up." Ada remained in that state for 5 long hours. Her breathing was faint but present. Panic set in for both the nanny and Uncle Sam as they anxiously awaited her revival. Just then, a knock echoed from Uncle Sam's door, prompting them to spring into action. Their bodies slick with sweat, Uncle Sam opened the door to find one of his Bible study students standing there. "Good evening, Uncle Sam. Are you going to teach us Bible today?" she asked cheerfully. Glancing at the clock, Uncle Sam shook his head. "Sorry, Amanda, I'm not feeling well. Let's continue tomorrow, okay?" He quickly shut the door behind her, letting out a sigh of relief as he wiped the sweat from his brow with his left hand. In the pitch-black darkness, the nanny gently lifted Ada and placed her on the bed in their room, vowing that such a frightening experience would never happen again. Ada drifted off to sleep, but when morning came, she found herself unable to move her legs, prompting her to burst into tears. Just as the nanny rushed to comfort her, there was a knock at the door from her parents. The nanny felt a jolt of panic and hurried back to Ada, urging her to stop crying before she went to answer the door. "Welcome, Auntie. Welcome, Uncle. How was your trip?" she greeted them cheerfully. "It went well," they replied in unison. "And where is our beloved daughter?" they inquired. "She's in the room, Ma," the nanny responded. Mrs. Okafor was the first to scoop Ada into her arms. She quickly noticed that her daughter was squirming as if trying to escape from something painful. Concerned, she looked closely at Ada and sensed that something was off. Turning to the nanny, she asked, "Has she had her bath this morning?" "No, Ma," the nanny replied. "Ah, that explains her strange behavior," Mrs. Okafor said, carrying Ada to the bathroom. As she began to wash her, the moment she touched Ada's backside, the little girl screamed. When she tried to wash that same area again, Ada cried out and sobbed uncontrollably. Mrs. Okafor turned her and noticed that Ada's body had already turned red. In a panic, she called her husband, and together they rushed Ada to the hospital, unable to soothe her relentless cries. Upon their arrival, the doctor conducted an examination and, after a moment of serious contemplation, turned to the parents and said, "Your daughter has been molested, which has caused her to go into severe shock. She is experiencing psychogenic aphonia." The couple gasped in disbelief. After a tense discussion with the doctor, they hurried back home, determined to get answers from the nanny. Mr. Okafor threatened to involve the police if the nanny didn't reveal what had happened to their daughter. Under pressure, the nanny began to confess everything she had made Ada endure. Mrs. Okafor's tears flowed freely as she struggled to process the horrifying revelations. They quickly gathered a group of men and stormed Uncle Sam's residence, where they confronted him and delivered a brutal beating. It was then that some of the other children he had taught began to share their own harrowing experiences of what Uncle Sam had done to them in secret. Ranging in age from 7 and older, Ada was the youngest among them. He had cleverly disguised his predatory behavior under the pretense of teaching them about God, masking his true nature as a pedophile. The men caused him injury, leading to a noticeable limp in one leg. From that moment on, Mr. and Mrs. Okafor never left Ada in anyone else's care. They consistently took her to the hospital until she fully recovered. As she grew older, they enrolled her in therapy. Over the years, she gradually began to find her voice again. The nanny was sent back home, and Mr. and Mrs. Okafor completely cut ties with her family. Uncle Sam passed away a year later, burdened by his injury and shame. Mr. and Mrs. Okafor decided to move out of the Face Me I Face You compound they lived in. Since then, they have devoted much more attention to their only child, Ada. It's important to ensure that our children are not left in the care of others, even if they are relatives. Strive to stay close to your child and keep a watchful eye on their surroundings. If possible, consider installing a CCTV camera when leaving your children alone with anyone. You can never be too cautious about who might pose a threat. Always remain vigilant and attentive to your children. I hope you found this story interesting. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, like, and share with your family and friends to spread awareness. Looking forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye.